The pediatricians issued their position paper that ramped up a bit to 8 or 10 a year, and a lot of districts across the northern tier of the lower 48 that were districts with a lot of ice time issues, a lot of pool time issues, started getting into some of the really complicated aspects of this on trying to juggle everything that high school students want to do during their academic day with after-school activities and potentially jobs. That kind of chugged along for a while, and the RAND Corporation, a national insurance underwriter, also issued another big piece of research that they had conducted during this kind of golden age of school closure research or school start time research. And they took before and after snapshots of accident rates and injuries for high school students who were driving in very early morning light, and found that there were significant savings and reductions in injuries and deaths in districts where start times were pushed later for high school drivers. Subsequent to 2014, quite a few districts have conducted studies. I have a longitudinal study of a big traffic impacted district in the South Denver metro area called Cherry Creek School District, and their study was called Castles. And it was one of the most complete before and after study of the effects of changing school start times. And it was actually proctored by Dr. Meltzer and Dr. Wallstrom. So the two leading researchers in the country were in charge of conducting the study, so it's considered to be kind of the high water mark for school start time research. Other things that happened were there were some opposition research pieces. In a lot of cases where there were a lot of high school students who disagreed with some of the research, and a lot of students who were either responsible for younger siblings and needed to go pick them up from school and provide childcare in the afternoon, or a lot of high school students who had multiple sports and multiple extracurricular activities that they were participating in, students who were in hockey or swam also found that there were some ice time conflicts. Some lower income schools where parents were challenged to get their students to school on time in the morning. There were challenges as far as start times going earlier, resulting in even more difficulty for families to get elementary school kids to school on time. So a lot of the research that was opposition research picked up on some of those issues and challenged some of those points in the research, and so there have been some pros and cons. Fundamentally, though, most of the districts who have made changes have tried to get secondary students, meaning middle and high school students, into a position where they could start school after 8:30. Most of the districts that have done some sort of study associated with moving those students to an 8:30 start or later have found that kids actually are getting more sleep. A lot of the opposition research was stating a significant number of students would cheat and would just stay up later when they know they can get up later. But what we've found in most of the districts where there's been some study done, that secondary students don't goof around in the morning. If they have an opportunity to sleep, they're actually taking advantage of that. So most of the places where there has been some sort of post-change research, we're finding that students are actually getting additional sleep, and a larger percentage of them are getting their recommended amount of sleep. So for elementary school students, that's a little over 10 hours a night. For middle school students, it's a little over 9 hours a night. And for high school students, it's a little over 8 hours a night. So, and it varies based upon the actual age of the child. But for the most part, the districts that have worked really hard in trying to address everyone's concerns, the majority of them have wound up with start times that actually fostered more children getting the recommended amount of sleep. One of the issues that we have dealt with here is elementary school students going first. And so some of the original research compliance scenarios were showing elementary students starting at 7:30, and then we fell back a little bit and showed some scenarios where they would start at 7:45, and then we have some compromise scenarios that I'll show you in a bit where the elementary students would start at 8 o'clock. A lot of the districts that have had really successful school start time conversions have put all of their starts between 8 and 9 o'clock. So that's kind of one of the best ways to get to success and to satisfy as many people as possible is to do what's called narrowing the window. So right now we have 45 minutes between our individual start times. So we have quite a wide window between 7:30 and 9, so ours is about an hour and a half. And driving conditions in Anchorage, Eagle River, Chugiak are such that when we interview most of our drivers and most of our schedulers and routers, they're indicating to us that they believe that 45 minutes is essential. And if we narrow that very much, we wind up with more late buses than would really be workable. So for the most part, we're looking at trying to work with an hour and a half window. We are looking at some things that we could do with schools being more effective at getting students on the bus at the end of school in order to narrow start times there, get students off of buses and into the building so that we're a little bit more efficient. So those are some things that we could explore. But for the most part, we're probably looking at a fairly fixed hour and a half window that we need to work with. There are some other pros and cons that are listed here. After school childcare for elementary school students. We met with 4 or 5 of the big childcare providers in the Anchorage Bowl 5 years ago when we explored making this change. So this is kind of the second time that we've looked at this. And so what they were suggesting was that they would shift the majority of their time to the afternoon as far as when they're providing childcare. And some of our parents have said that might actually be a little bit more cost effective for them because they would not be, if they are taking advantage of or able to fund wraparound childcare, they would only be looking at the afternoon and not the morning and the afternoon. So there were some pluses to that if we were to have an 8 a.m. start for elementary school. What we're finding when we anecdotally interview our elementary school teachers and our elementary school principals is they're agreeing with Kyla Wallstrom's research indicating that elementary school students have a power band that begins to be exhausted by about 1:30, 1:45 in the afternoon. And so what we're finding for districts that are on the traditional start order where elementary students start at 9 o'clock or later, a lot of those students are running out of gas by about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And the last hour and a half or hour and 45 minutes of school is a challenge for them, and they're sleepy and tired and a little bit less able to learn. We have heard from about 2/3 of our teachers who have agreed with that. So we have conducted 9 focus groups for elementary, middle, and high school teachers during this cycle of exploring start times. And we have run 6 focus groups with principals during this cycle of focus groups, and we've asked that question every time. And we seem to be getting a fairly consistent response that if elementary school students were to start earlier, they're going to bed early, they are bouncing off the wall first thing in the morning, and it might be a better educational solution for us to have elementary school children in school earlier. Now, obviously, early morning darkness is an issue, So you see up here in the pros and cons, we've got a variety of pros and cons that are of concern. And children, young children, littles, walking in darkness is an issue. So between about November and late February, we know that that's a challenge because it's dark way into mid-morning. So a very early start time would have more children walking in cold and darkness. So that's one of the reasons that some of the scenarios that you're going to see go through a variety of compromise situations where we take that elementary starting at 7:30, and then we push back to 7:45, then we push back to 8. And a lot of the big districts that have had successful starts have put that elementary start at 8 o'clock. And there seems to be kind of a comfort level there where a lot of parents are a little bit more comfortable with that. We're doing some research on when is rush hour in Anchorage, and are we doing something that might complicate traffic? So we're working on that a little bit. But most of the police officers that we've spoken with say the morning drop is a little bit less complicated. So even though going earlier in the morning, we're putting a little bit more vehicular traffic on the highway, parents are going to the school and the child gets out of the car and they leave. They're not waiting around for 15 minutes for school to be out. So the congestion issues around school sites are significantly less than they are in the morning than they are in the afternoon. So that's one of the things that we're trying to carefully consider regarding changing elementary start time from 9:30 to 8, or from I think 8:45 to 8, in order to make sure that we're not creating a situation that would be challenging from a traffic standpoint. Some of the pros are up here on the left side: less tardiness, negative behaviors on the part of secondary students. More of them get their recommended sleep. Improved family atmosphere. We have families at events, basketball games, etc. Children that walk up to us and say, this is the best thing that we've ever done. This improved the climate in our family dramatically because we're not constantly in conflict with each other over getting out of bed in the morning. So when students get the appropriate amount of sleep, they're a little bit easier to get going in the morning, way easier to get going in the morning, and that's one of the things that we're hearing in districts where they've made changes. Less depression behaviors, less school day fatigue, less binge sleeping on the weekend. I don't think I have this up here, but a lot of adults, and a lot of these behaviors that we're talking about and saying kids do this, these are things adults do as well. But binge sleeping on the weekend, there's less of that when students are getting an appropriate amount of sleep during the work week, during the school week. Improved performance, especially first period, and a variety of other mental health improvements for both parents and teachers. And that was one of the interesting things about the Castle study, is that we also had teacher and parent guinea pigs on that study as well, and found that the change in start time had some wellness outcomes for them. A lot of them were getting something closer to their recommended amount of sleep, and a lot of them reported feeling less tired and less sleepy during the day, and binge sleeping on the weekend a little bit less. So here's kind of the chronology of what we've been through here in Anchorage. We had a petition that had about 3,000 signatures on it from a high school student, and the board initiated an exploration of school start times in fall of 2017. I conducted 40 some odd focus group, open house, town hall meetings during the spring of 2018, exploring some very research compliant options 1, 2, and 3, which we'll show you in just a moment. And then we adjusted scenarios, and the final recommendation was called option B, which moved high school from a 7:30 start to 8 a.m., so about a half-hour benefit. And then elementary was in second position at 8:45, and middle school was at 9:30. What I was recommending at that point was something that a lot of districts that have put middle school in last place have done, which is hire a teacher on an extra duty contract to run a study hall at the middle schools for students that need to be dropped at school early along with elementary age siblings, and those students are able to work on homework, study for exams, do whatever they would like to do, but they would be doing it in the cafeteria or the library in a warm, safe, supervised environment. The district that has the longitudinal study that we'll show you in a bit, they're doing that at 7 locations, and their attendance is about 30 to 45 students every day. And their schools are a little bit larger than ours. So that's the participation that they have. It's not the whole student body coming in, it's just a small subset. They were able to manage that cost effectively, and it would just be a 1 period a day extra duty contract. And for us, we would do it at 9 sites, I think, where we would have possibly have those study halls. Here are the original scenarios. You can see our current start and end. And keep in mind, we have a 6.5-hour academic day. But what we were doing was starting high school. What we do now is high school at 7:30, middle school is second at 8:15, and then elementary is last at 9 o'clock. So scenario 1 would put elementary in first position at 7:30, and then we would have middle school at 8:15, and high school would be last at 9 o'clock. And for high school, that would be research compliant according to the position paper from the American Academy of Pediatricians. So that's why it has the smiley face over there indicating that's research compliant. A lot of folks have kind of doubted some of the sleep research given its applicability to Alaska, given the amount of dark and cold that we have here. We've interviewed pediatricians, sleep doctors, physician's assistants, nurses. I have here and in Fairbanks, and we get a consistent response from a lot of these folks saying the impacts and the effects of sleep deprivation for adolescents is worse in Alaska than it is elsewhere. And most of the folks that we're talking with from the medical community are very much in favor of this. Now, I don't know how many of them have middle and high school students that are in 5 events and what their personal circumstances are, but as medical folks, most of them have been in favor of us changing things. There are 4 or 5 sleep disorder centers in Fairbanks, and there are 8 or 9 here in Anchorage. So there are a lot of folks in the state who are on happy lights or have other issues with our climate and our daylight issues. But a lot of the folks we're talking with are pediatricians who have caseloads of 12 or 18 kids that actually have sleep issues. Second scenario, we moderated, or the first scenario you see, we put elementary in first position, high school in last. The second scenario, we pushed everything back 15 minutes to try to not have elementary students out the door quite so early. And then we put middle school second at 8:30 and high school last at 9:15. Now, a lot of people profoundly believe that high school kids aren't fully functional until about 10 o'clock. So that scenario kind of flowed from that point of view. Now, I know high school kids that are out of bed at 5:30, especially farm kids, military kids, kids that are really, really structured about school and are really super hyper motivated. But the research is saying that that second scenario would be very effective, and so you see 2 smiley faces next to middle and high school to indicate it's research compliant for both of those levels. Scenario 3 puts high school in second position, and that was a fallback that I suggested because we have a lot of high school students who have jobs, a lot of high school students that have responsibilities for childcare, a lot of high school students that are in robotics, debate, track, wrestling, football, all at the same time. And so a lot of those students were looking for more time in the afternoon, so we put high school in second position and still got that scenario to be completely research compliant. But again, the elementary students would be out the door at 7:45. So pros and cons of those, this is the original pro and con sheet from 2018. Some of the new things on this were some of our military families were saying that band of time between 7:45 and 9 was my quality time with my elementary school student. And if you push that to 8 o'clock, most of my time to visit with my little kids would be on the weekend. And we heard that fairly consistently, a lot of it associated with PT schedules. That was a consistent thing that we heard on J-Bear and in the Eagle River area with military families saying that that early morning elementary school time had an intrinsic value that might not be apparent to everybody else in the Anchorage Bowl. So here were some compromise scenarios. Again, the current starts shown at the top, and you can see what I suggested here was falling back to 8 o'clock. So high school would start at 8 o'clock under that scenario 4. Elementary would start at 8:45. They'd be in second position, and then middle school would start at 9:30. And one of the key features of this is that high school would be complete by 2:30. Elementary would be out at 3:15. So a high school student responsible for younger siblings could leave school in their car, go to their younger siblings' elementary school, pick them up, take them home. So that was what that facilitated, was that it made that part of the family circumstance for high school students responsible for younger children work. Scenario number 5 gets us back into both high school and middle school being research compliant, and we put high school in second position starting at 8:45. So high school would start at 8:45, middle school at 9:30, and that would result in both middle school and high school being research compliant, but it creates the potential for a 45-minute latchkey situation for elementary school students where they wouldn't have that immediate supervision of an older sibling. They would be a little late. So there would need to be some sort of child care coverage at the school or some other option to make sure that those students weren't at loose ends. So those were the compromise scenarios. This district, Cherry Creek School District, I've worked for these folks for almost 30 years, and they decided to make this change. They moved their high school from an 7:10 start to an 8:20 start, and moved their elementary from a 9 a.m. start to an 8 a.m. start. So they did more or less what we're discussing to do in some of those compromise scenarios. Now, a lot of people refer to Colorado as Arizona with snow, which is not too far off the mark, but traffic in this area is profound. This is one of the most traffic encumbered communities in the Denver metro area, and so they have a lot of problems with getting around. Buses, they were right in the middle of a driver crisis when they made this change, and so a lot of their complication is just as impacted by a bad traffic day than it would be by a big snowstorm. Now, nothing like Snowmageddon, so nothing like what hit us in January, but they have some challenges. Seattle also had similar challenges and decided to have a mill levy election to hire additional buses and drivers and light their fields, because making this change was so important to them that the majority of their community was willing to fund some of those kind of changes. Other districts in the northern tier of the country have also funded changes in pool and ice time so that students would not be getting up at the crack of dawn like they had been historically. A lot of hockey and swim team parents were saying, all of these health benefits that are going to non-swimmers and non-skaters, I want that for my child. So a lot of those students were benefited when some of those districts decided they would put some resources into restructuring morning practices, moving adults around, and doing some things that gave children priority for pool and ice time. And so some of the things that have been done in Minnesota, in the Dakotas, and in Montana have been rather interesting, where they made morning ice and morning pool happen in a time frame that facilitated athletes getting a little something a little bit closer to proper sleep. So this district found that their elementary students only got 1 minute less sleep a night by moving from 9 o'clock to 8 o'clock. And about 2% of the students involved in the big sample failed to get sufficient sleep for their age category. At the middle school level, 29 kids, or the average middle school student in the sample, got 29 minutes more sleep a night. And what happened was 20.5% of students in the sample wound up getting the recommended amount of sleep for their age. So 1 in 5 middle school students wound up getting the right amount of sleep. At the high school level, the average high school student involved in the study got 45 minutes more sleep a night. And 1 in 3 high school students wound up getting the recommended daily amount of sleep that they're supposed to be getting. So that part of this study was considered to be a resounding success. There are 3 other districts, I think, that have published research with similar outcomes. The other districts didn't really measure before and after. No one has measured with the amount of detail that Wallstrom and Meltzer used. Again, is this Alaskan research? No, it's not. We have not had interest on the part of our university communities to explore this. Funding is an issue. Conducting these kind of sleep research studies without significant university or research hospital underwriting is very difficult to do. Cherry Creek actually contributed to the budget for the research project when they did it. So we don't have any research in Alaska, unfortunately, that would document and explore what Alaskan children face given their sleep schedules, darkness, and cold. As far as other indicators of depression and wellness, we just picked out sad, nervous, worried, tired, sleepy. There was very little effect per 1,000 elementary school students. Down at the bottom, you see 24 out of 1,000 reported feeling tired during the academic day after the change versus what they said before the change. And then about 20 said they were sleepy during the day out of 1,000 after the change versus what they said before the change. At the middle school level, improvements, which is why you see those are negative numbers out of 1,000. 15, 28 said less likely to feel nervous or worried. 83 less likely to be tired. 59 less likely to be sleepy. At the high school level is where they got the big benefit with tired and sleepy, and you see almost 200 students out of 1,000, or 1 in 5, reported an improvement in how they felt during the academic day after the change versus before. First period behaviors: ready for school, alert, prepared, participated. 4 to 8% improvement for middle school students, 11 to 17% improvement for high school students. For athletics, 8% fewer middle school students said they were able to participate in an after-school activity. So that's a negative for the thing. And that was a little bit more pronounced with girls. So young women were a little bit more challenged by the schedule than young men were. At the high school level, only 2% had an impact on their ability to participate in athletics. Activities was 3% and 1%. 7% of the high school students reported they were more able to participate in after-school employment than they had been before because they were well rested and they still had energy after the school day to do something else. First period grades went up between 1.5% and 3.5% depending upon the level. So that's basically the research. We're going to pause, and I'm going to ask Joe Zawadny to talk a little bit about the professional learning community concept, which is a late start on Monday, and I'll turn it over to Joe. Take it away, Joe.
Can you all hear me okay? Okay. So I'm going to take a little bit of time right now just to talk about an initiative that we've presented to the school board and academic services and teaching and learning is really excited about how to take and leverage some time during the school day to help support student learning. A method that we have employed at the high schools for several years now is called professional learning communities, PLCs. If any of you have high school students, this is a process that you're already familiar with. On Mondays throughout the year, high schools start an hour later so that teachers and professionals at the building can collaborate in communities on areas of interest and academic need for students in order to support the learning that's going on there. So, overall, the PLCs are meant to help buildings address some of the ASD initiatives such as college, career, and life readiness, some of the new curriculum implementation, and some of the state initiatives like the Alaska Reads Act, ways to monitor those programs and initiatives, and then the increased emphasis on supporting students' social emotional learning and mental health services. PLCs are a system that are used across the country as a way to support student learning. It provides time, like I said, for professionals within the building, teachers, paraprofessionals, other staff to collaborate on ways to support students. It addresses, in addition to academic and classroom practices, it's a way for teachers to come together and support students who may be struggling with attendance, achievements, and some other areas of the school environment that our students sometimes struggle with. And then it really gives our teachers a time to sit and look at the data that we collect to help improve instruction and the student experience. The proposal that was presented to the school board last week proposed a district-wide PLC structure in which all teachers across the district at all 3 levels, elementary, middle, and high school, are engaged in PLCs. It's a system, as I mentioned, high schools are already using this. At middle school, PLCs are often completed during the school day during collaboration time. What we don't have right now is a system across all of our elementaries to access this level of collaboration and improvement. And so for next year, we would be implementing at the elementary and some of our alternative programs, the professional learning communities as well. With Shannon's presentation in mind, but the way that this impacts the school start time conversation is on Mondays, then if we change start time order or start times, it pushes the school day back 1 hour. So under the current system, we see our high school students starting at 8:30 on Mondays, where they normally would start at 7:30. Their start time is pushed by an hour. And so in a district-wide PLC system, you would see those high school students starting at 8:30, middle school starting at 9:15, and then elementary starting at 10 o'clock. So an hour later than you might be used to. The school day would end at the same time. In the next scenario, what you'll see is and these mirror the late start scenarios that Shannon presented earlier. You see, as we change the order of school start time, elementary to middle and high, elementary, middle, and high, and pushing the school day back 15 minutes. And then scenario 3 is where we have elementaries followed by high school and ending with middle school at the end of the 3-school rotation. Finally, we see the top is what we currently have in place. Scenario 4 is the recommendation from 2018, where we had recommended that school start typically for high school at 8. With the PLC Mondays, that start time would be pushed back an hour, right? Followed by elementary and middle. And finally, the research compliant order would be elementary starting before high school and middle. So as you have a chance to take a look at this presentation online, you might want to compare what this Monday start time looks like compared to Tuesday through Friday, just so you can see how that might impact the start time for your students.
Thank you, Joe. One of the questions that was asked night before last was, would we still have the middle school study hall if we did this? And that would be my recommendation that we would, because that would ease that 10:30 start for middle school students. So, you know, I've watched a lot of the body language as we've put that 10:30 start on Monday up there, and a lot of parents going, how would I cope with that mid-morning start? And I think that might be one way that we could do that. And I think the cost of that would be somewhat minimal. But you know, anything we do with providing additional service is going to have a cost associated with it. But that would be the recommendation. And I can think of a couple of other districts that implemented PLCs, and they did a little bit of mitigation for parents to try to ease that a little bit. And I can think of probably 4 out of 5 that did not. So it varies from district to district. But if we were to go to a later start time, I could see that middle school start time being of concern for some parents. So that's our presentation for the evening. We'd like to transition into hearing from you. We have our survey available in 4 languages at the moment. It's also online on the Chromebooks over next to Miss Miller over there, and there are paper surveys as well. And then you can just point your smartphone camera at this in order to activate it. And I will go to the English one, which is huge, which will guarantee that you can pick it up from your seat there. So with that, I'd like to call on our participants. And as the floor mic, we have the floor mic right in the middle here. If you could come forward and speak into the microphone. We are webcasting this, and that ensures that folks that are watching at home, and we usually have 50 or 60 people watching at home, can hear your question. And Sven's going to make sure that that's turned on. I'd like to start with Jason Law, followed by Jennifer Bundy.
So, thank you. I came in here tonight with a different idea, and you've helped to change that. So I'm more open to this idea and making the changes based on what the community thinks is best for our kids. I teach high school, and I put together this 3-page thing that was going to squeeze into 3 minutes, and I do want to share some parts of it, even though it doesn't relate directly to what you're sharing. It does relate, however, to students and what I see in the classroom and their sleep habits as it all ties in together. So
Great.
Really quickly, my name is Jason Wall. I teach at Chugiak High School. I'm also the Nordic head ski coach there. Very invested in my community. And I guess I'm going to stick to the guns here. I'd like to address tech, schools, and sleep. Tech is often a large obstacle that's faced by our students in all of our schools. The real issue that we're facing collectively is the dependence of our kids on technology. That should be another one of our focuses, and I know it is for many teachers, but it's a tough battle to fight. Throughout all of my candid discussions with my students, they have shared that video games and cell phones do actually create an addiction, and after it affects their sleeping patterns. They have shared this with me. And I hope that this will help to address some of that. I hope this doesn't persist where they continue with this dynamic of the algorithms that they find themselves within and pursuing one thing after the next. Does this mean we face the same problem just later, as the clock runs? I just recently saw something with the House Speaker on Energy and Commerce, Congressman John Sarbanes of Maryland, in his testimony with TikTok CEO Shu Chu, who states 16% of teens use TikTok almost constantly, and that's 5 million children in middle and high school whose brains are not fully developed. And to paraphrase, it's the algorithms versus the undeveloped human brain, the young brain swimming endlessly in these algorithms. Engineered endless scrolling features keep kids focused on what's in their phones, often creating this warped sense and sleep deprivation. Rather than using this most powerful tool that they were intended to be, they have become crutches to address their boredom. And the majority of our students do not understand and comprehend the complexities of the biological necessity of boredom. If there are any free moments in their day, those moments are snatched up by phones and games, and it's not feeding them, but depleting glucose in their brains, for which we do not have an infinite supply. Once tapped out, these small gas tanks, as I like to call them, of energy, as it applies to learning, is not replenished until the next full sleep cycle. The problem with that is the sleep cycle as it stands right now is not full, and so those tanks are not refilled adequately. Boredom is a necessary component. We've all faced it at some point, but the children that we are teaching now, they've known nothing else but a cell phone and the connections to those. And I'm not saying that good things aren't being done and kids aren't addressing some of their behaviors, but I think a lot of times they kind of run hog wild with it. I can see it throughout my day, something as simple as watching a student walk by my classroom, back to their classroom, using the bathroom, staring at their phone in their hand, as no real sense of urgency to get back to class and figure out what they might be missing. So I really hope that this helps to facilitate that. I was not open to the change in school times. I am now. I forgot one thing. I do want to plug something, because in the end, we really all want what's best for our kids. I got 3 little ones in elementary, and like I said, I teach high school. I do want to plug, and I know I've been kind of random, but this completely got reshaped and reshifted after talking to some folks and watching your presentation. So I just wanted to plug ASD and tell them nice job on their continued work with Nashville Hub. If the public's unaware, you need to check this out if you have high school students, because the dynamic of this program that's related to Nashville and the study they've done there, it has to do with college and career pathways, and I urge you to check it out. I had a chance to go down there and visit high schools, and it's a complete game changer, and I think it will help to alleviate some of the issues we face with kids maybe not coming to school to be connected. It will, reconnect them more than might otherwise be with strict core and electives. It'll give them some more focus and such, especially for our tiered kids who are struggling in school as it starts. So hope that made sense.
Jason, do you mind if I take your notes and make a copy for the board to read? I'll give them back to you in just a second. I'll use my camera. Jennifer Bundy, followed by Benjamin Long.
Hi, my name's Jennifer Bundy. I have 4 children. My oldest is out of high school. He graduated from Chugiak. Then I have 2 that are in high school right now and 1 that's an elementary school student. I attended the presentation back in 2018 and gave my feedback then. I appreciate some of the updated information. It addresses how it will affect elementary schools a little bit more, which didn't really have any information I felt on that last time. But these are some of the notes that I made as I was listening to your presentation. And as I've done research. So one of the things that I think drives this is they say that the biology changes for those middle and high school students, which is circadian rhythms, which, as you've said, has not really been addressed in Alaska. You've said there's a lot of sleep problems in Alaska, but that affects the adults as well. So making this change, I don't know if that's going to benefit the children. There are other researches that on your con slide showed that there are some school districts that said that there have been a negligent change. So it's going to be a big change for the community in order to make this change, and whether it will be beneficial, I'm still on the fence about that. One of the concerns was teen driving, less accidents. Well, Alaska weather, again, daylight changes all year long. So sometimes they will still be driving in that. Sometimes it's dark, sometimes it's light. It just changes all year long. If we do sports earlier in the day, my son is very concerned that there would be maybe no chance to shower and be sweaty and stinky for the rest of the day. And if we are doing sports early, would that mean that all the games would be in the afternoon so parents could still attend? Because if they're working in the morning, they wouldn't be able to attend those competitions or sometimes get their children to those if a bus isn't an option. A change like this will affect the whole community. If older kids have later events, then it could make their siblings that are younger still have to go with them to those events, which could keep them up later, which then they're still having to get up earlier. Work schedules of parents, childcare, which you've already addressed some of those things. You talked about that there might be less binge sleeping on the weekend, so I wondered how this related to summertime when students have the opportunity to have more sleep. I still see them binge
30
sleeping.
seconds.
I also work in an opportunity where I'm able to talk to children, and I talk to them, and I ask them during the summer, oh, what did you do? Oh, I stayed up, I'm really tired. I stayed up till 2 or 3 in the morning playing on my phone, as was addressed by technology issues. Also, what if there are no buses? We know that that was an issue this last year. It may be an issue in the future, which we've kind of figured some of those things out. It could be other issues this time. And
Time, please.
question to the PLC, if we switched and did that, would middle and elementary do that at the same time? And if so, would the buses all run 60 minutes later, or would the students still be expected to have the bus there at the initial start time and then have, like at the high school, they have to stay in the cafeteria or in the library during that time while the PLCs are happening? Thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer. I think the bus run starts would all push back an hour. So I think everything would start an hour late on Monday, but it would end at the same time at the end of the day. So there wouldn't be an impact at the end of the day. As far as would implementation of elementary and middle school coincide, I think they would be staggered. So there would be the elementary PLC would start first. If we make the change, high school would start first if we don't. But I think the program itself, we're starting with elementary schools, aren't we? Aren't we doing that first, Joe, or not? Are we starting with elementary PLC first? Is that what our preference is? Okay, so it just depends on the start order. Great. Go ahead, Benjamin. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Dr. Benjamin Long. I am a board-certified pediatrician and sleep medicine physician who practices at the hospital on J-Bear. Additionally, I'm also a parent with a child in the Anchorage School District. I wanted to come tonight to commend the district for their efforts at trying to address school start times. As a sleep medicine physician, I see the impact of early school start times in my office every single day. There is a unique challenge faced by many teenagers who need to get at least roughly 8.5 to 10.5 hours of sleep per night. This is also in the setting of the natural delay in their circadian rhythm, as we've talked about previously, in their biological clock. This combination of the amount of sleep needed and their natural delay in their circadian rhythm not only makes it difficult to fall asleep at night, but wake up earlier in the morning, and I see this every single day for my patients. This is especially true for children and teenagers who have some degree of neurodisability, such as children with ADHD or autism. Sleep becomes an even more critical component for them to be able to not only pay attention in class, but also to regulate their emotions and behaviors during the day. Anecdotally, station in Alaska, I do see a noticeable jump in these concerns during Alaska's dark winter. I recognize the sleep of Alaskan children is a complex problem beyond just the time that school starts, as other people have said, for technology and other activities that families have. And of course, with any of these proposed changes, there will always be families adversely impacted by the change. However, I do urge the district that this is a tangible change that can help our children be set up for success at school. In my professional opinion, I would recommend at least delaying school start times for middle school and high school until at least 8:30. However, this does not negate the real concerns that many families will have with these changes. So rather than that, these challenges should be seen as a call for our community, including the district, community organizations, employers, churches, neighbors, families, to come alongside those families potentially adversely impacted by this change and support them in their need. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Long. I'd love to interview you over the phone on behalf of the Board of Education. So if you could make sure either I get your contact information or Lisa Miller does, we'd appreciate it. Thank you. So next we have Courtney Courtney's next, followed by Jacob Barra. I'm sorry. Horazdovsky.
Horazdovsky. I heard the pause. I knew it must be me. My name is Courtney Horazdovsky. I have 3 kids, elementary school and younger, so they are obviously not the age group that is the focus of this change, but I, as a formerly working parent, just wanted to make sure that there are some things that are considered. I'm sure they've all been considered. The first thing, and I hate being a fatalist, but how realistic are making these changes? I feel like, especially for some of the times as they go towards elementary students, some of those seem to require like workforce level changes, and I wonder if the Chamber of Commerce has weighed in more recently. Obviously, COVID has happened since this research was since the original round of input, and I wonder now that a lot of employers are being more flexible with work from home, if any of their input has changed, and I wasn't able to quickly find what it was last time around. So just how realistic is it? And speaking of budgets and investing resources into transportation and changing pools and swim times and ice times, we already have a budget crisis, and how much willpower is there to make a change like this effectively in these trying times? Are we still saying that?
Sure.
Let's see. And another thing I see is the family impacts. As far as there's the child care, that's one thing. Just for myself, with elementary students participating in after-school activities, even when they were pushed back to 4, it meant that our skiing was pushed back to 7 to 8, which is getting the crunch time for bedtime. And if we have after-school activities for younger children and they then have earlier start times in the morning, that will impact the timing of when they're able to do stuff. And as a working parent, when I was working full-time, I would get off at 6. So coming home to Chugiak was getting home at 7. And getting my kids to bed, there's this very small window of eating dinner and doing it. There's a reason I'm not working full-time anymore, but 6 o'clock is still a fairly common out time. And so especially I think out here where many parents commute for 30, 40 minutes each way, the impacts on earlier bedtimes would mean elementary kids would spend longer times in after-school care, less time with their parents at home. Let's see. And also just childcare after and before school is, we're already in lots of shortages. There's wait lists. That's a major factor. Again, I want to know if there's different input or if there have been further studies on places that have made the change since we originally went through this round in 2018. And as far as the PLC time, I think all of that is a great idea, but if elementary school stays at 10 a.m. or at a 9 a.m. start time, 10 a.m., I don't see how working parents can really make that work without getting 1 hour of childcare 1 day a week, which how's that possible? I don't know. People have a really hard time finding, especially before school care or anything in the evening. So I think that is it.
Great. Thank you, Courtney. So just to address one thing that you mentioned, we did do a focus group with about 45 members of the chamber back in 2018. We were mostly asking them about the effects on high school age employees, but for the most part, we surveyed them and they were in favor of making the change. But we have had quite a few parents, especially those who have their student in a school other than their neighborhood school on school of choice, saying this would require a change in my start time at work and would require some flexibility. or some pretty significant changes. And that's been one of the arguments behind giving families at least a year's notice before the change would be implemented. So that's been one of the outcomes of, yes, we know this would affect everybody in the Anchorage Bowl at Chugiak and Eagle River who is a working parent, and we need to kind of think about all of the impacts associated with that. We have these 5 scenarios that we kind of showed you this time, and the board, I'm hoping, will pick 2 of them, and then we'll drill down super deep into them and try to see what everybody's perspective, everybody's impact, everybody's concern, everybody's adjustment would be, and put all of those chess pieces on the board, and meaning a chessboard, and kind of look at it and say, is this the best solution that gets us some benefit without impacting a lot of folks unduly? So I think that that's kind of what we think is next, is after this process, and we report to the board what the generic support for the idea is, we'll be looking at some details on how it will impact people. Thanks.
Yeah, I was gonna say, my kids are at a school other than our neighborhood school, so for us, it's have to drop them off and pick them up, or Campfire, which shortened its hours since the pandemic, so.
Sure.
All things.
Sure. Thank you.
Courtney, after.
Jacob?
I'm
Followed
Jacob
by
Barra.
Adam Schicks after.
My wife and I are both teachers, and we have 3 kids. I have an 8-year-old, a 10-year-old, and a 13-year-old. And so I listened to the discussions before the pandemic, and then I watched the presentations you gave throughout the week. And so much of this discussion has been centered on the benefits of secondary students, which I don't doubt at all. But in my opinion, none of this matters if parents can't get kids to the bus stops and into school. And so I'd like to see more focus on elementary-aged parents, and especially single parents who are responsible for getting their elementary-age students to school, and to see whether it's focus groups or anything else, how this would impact them. Because to me, I think that is the most stressed dynamic or demographic in this whole scenario. The benefits are great to secondary students. I teach high school. I know what it's like to teach kids during first period, but my wife and I have 3 elementary kids, and well, a middle schooler now, and we were penciling out the scenarios that you had on the screen, and for most of them, we wouldn't be here. We'd be starting to wind our kids down now. We'd have our kids up at 5:30 to 6 just to get them to the bus stop on time or to get them to school. And so that is, to me, I see the biggest impact of this is the stress that it would cause families, young families, and single parents especially, that are trying to get their elementary age kids to school. And I just don't see a lot of that discussion really focusing on them. And so I'm glad to hear that, this isn't kind of the end of the process, that it's going to sort of continue. Of the scenarios you showed, for my wife and I talking, I think scenario 4 was probably the most workable one for us. And I think that had high school going first at 8, which isn't perfect, but at least it's closer to that sleep research. And it had elementary at 8:45, I think it was, and middle school at 9:15. And with a middle schooler an hour, the only sort of detriment to that I see is that their after-school practices and events are going to be super compressed, especially in the winter. But again, to me, talking to families of elementary age students, and especially single families or single parents, that is the most important demographic I think that this study should be targeting, and just making sure that the negatives don't outweigh the pros to secondary students.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. And Adam Schicks is last.
My name is Adam Schicks. I'm in the United States Air Force. I've been up here for about 7 years and plan to retire. I've got 3 daughters in the Anchorage School District. It's like Corey was reading my notes there, in that when I did the research and took a look at all of your slides ahead of time, it was all very interesting, but it was very sleep center focused. And I found your anecdote about the elementary school teachers and the power band very interesting, because they could come into my workspace and find the exact same results. Around 1 o'clock, we all kind of start to die off, and we don't come back until about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And in fact, that is one of the things that I'm air crew on one of the airplanes that fly off of the base, and we do a lot of sleep studies in the way that we manage sleep for going and flying missions as well. We call it crew rest and duty day, those kind of things. And there's a lot of studies that happens with that, and that is universal throughout the life cycle kind of a thing. It just changes based on developing kids, so that's very interesting. So as the grandson of a teacher, the son of a teacher, the son-in-law of a teacher, and a brother of a teacher, I'd be remiss if I didn't start off by saying thank you very much for coming out and doing this. I know how hard you guys work, and I think it's incredibly important what you do. So thank you very much, and this is really good that you're coming out and having this discussion. I think that again, like I said, very focused on sleep as the center of the factor, what I would call the highest weighted factor in what you're doing, and how you're evaluating it is based on sleep and sleep availability. Whereas I think that if there was a holistic look, you would, much the way Corey was talking about, the family unit would be the most critical factor in a student's success. And I don't think anybody here would disagree with that. So there are I think there's additional research that needs to be done and how that affects the family research. As an example, as we design out our day for our children, the two most important parts of the day is breakfast and dinner, and it's around a dinner table and around a breakfast table for the kids. So as you are designing your start day and the stop of the day, that to me is probably the most two important times. When we slid 30 minutes to the right for the makeup days, that had a significant impact for our after-school activities, and so I think that that's an important thing to consider. Another thing is while we're focusing on sleep for high school students I think are the ones that require the most attention, whereas elementary schools students require the most amount of parental engagement for success. And so I think an earlier start for a high school student facilitates an afternoon and a well-rounded life for that environment. So, and it sounds like my time's up. So the last thing I will address, since we had two topics that were presented here, the last one was the PLC. Being, as I said, the son, grandson, son-in-law, and brother of a teacher, while I understand the absolute need to build time in for those teachers, to have the professional development time, if you look at over the last 50 years and the amount of work that we've put onto our teachers for administration, we have stolen their time away from the administration level down. They are asking for more time as teachers because we've taken that away because of all of the work that they have to do in preparation for the classroom and after the classroom, and we've kind of done that to ourselves. So we're going to wind up taxing parents because administration has put more and more weight on the teachers in the classroom. Thank you for the extra time.
Thank you, Adam. Well, do we have anyone that would like to make ask a quick question or make a quick comment? We've got a little bit of time left before we need to clear the room. Anybody else that would like to make a quick comment, ask a quick question? Yes, ma'am. Absolutely.
Just a really quick question, and so analyzing a lot of different families are they're just unique. The child spacing, the number of children is spacing, and I thought it was interesting that a big factor that was stated a lot and that I read a few years ago when this was online was that older high schoolers are necessary, to like maybe be child care for their younger siblings.
Sure.
I was just curious on the research behind that because there's just such a wide variety of family sizes. And to me, I have 6th grade, 3rd grade, and kindergartner. In 6th grade's that buffer zone, it could be middle school. And I've noticed that, as my kids get older, and I'm really grateful that Alaska doesn't have child care age laws, that I, as a parent, get to choose how old they can be and how I think they're responsible to stay home for, whatever amount of time by themselves. But it is that younger group that does need constant supervision. And so I just, in regards to like older siblings being necessary, sometimes older elementary siblings could also be child care, and Also the demographic of high schoolers that have a car that their parents are able to purchase, and for them to be able to go pick up, like it's their responsibility to go pick up younger siblings, that's just weighted kind of heavily. And I don't know if that's just one of the myriad of pros and cons that has been chosen, but I thought that was interesting that that's kind of more of a weighted thing when it's, I feel like, a really complicated, and it's hard to study families because they're different every year. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Just to kind of clarify, there's a 5 to 12% faction of every person that has a concern about school start time. So 5% of people may be a high school age student who either walks to their little brother's elementary school to pick them up and walk them home, or they drive. 12% of people are high school athletes that are concerned about daylight practice time. There's another percentage of students that maybe 10 or 12% who work. So there are all of these little groups of folks that are 5 to 12% of the community that have a real specific concern. And I guess kind of part of my job is to try to see if there's a way to better reconcile that than it's reconciled now. Because what we have now has persisted for 25 years. And the problem with it is that kids aren't getting enough sleep. And we have these, kids that are in this zombie-like state first period, and then they're just not healthy because they're not getting enough sleep. And that's happening in Anchorage and Fairbanks pretty intensively. I think I was listing the number of sleep disorder centers that are around, and a lot of these peds that I talk to, pediatricians, a big part of their caseload are kids under 18. So I think that, that's kind of the elephant in the room, is that we have this system that's somewhat reconciled right now, but what's happening is we have a real unhealthy situation for kids that are, between 11 and 17 right now. And so a lot of parents are really saying that's the one thing that I'd like to see you do. Everything else is secondary, but everything else can't be secondary. We have to look at all those chess pieces and figure out a way to try to see if we can get those kids more sleep. But we have all sorts of other circumstances with elementary age children, military families that like the way things are structured. In 2018, it was costing between $900 and $1,250 a month for wraparound childcare for one child. So one of the things that we've heard that some elementary school families see as a benefit is that they would only have to buy the afternoon if they have a super intensive 8 to 5:30 job and they have to buy after school childcare from a commercial provider. They were saying they could see some cost savings because they wouldn't have to buy the morning childcare. So, those are some of the things that we're kind of juggling at the moment. Any other questions or comments? Yes, ma'am.
What happened in 2018 that this issue with its 3 scenarios were tabled and that we're revisiting it 5 years later?
I don't know. Maybe Sven can address that.
So the simple reason for that is that we have a new school board. None of the school board members that were on the school board in 2018 are here now. We have a brand new school board, and as we came out of the pandemic, we're looking at all the different things that might be able to support kids, and the school board did ask us to go ahead and take a look at this in January and come back with a recommendation, and that's why we're revisiting and re-talking to people and gathering more information now. Did that answer your question?
Oh,
It would be a monumental shift. It would be a bummer in 5 years to then change it again when there's a new school board.
And that's why the school board members are here too, to see you.
I might add a little bit of value to that. A lot of kids are coming out of the pandemic pretty dinged up right now. So I would say there's a real desire nationally, now that the dust has kind of settled, to try to see if there's something we can do to give kids a win. And so there's a lot of interest in, for districts that couldn't find a compromise that would work for everybody, a lot of them are going back and looking at this again because they see, they've seen a lot of mental health issues on the part of young people coming out of the pandemic, and a lot of these sleep issues are at the root of a lot of it. And so I think that you're going to hear a lot of the districts that did not make a change may have looked, and a lot of big districts that have never looked. During the next probably 36 months, I think there'll be a rash of school start time exploration. Yes, ma'am.
Have you looked into Juneau and talked with them? I believe that they have an elementary start time of 7:30, and their high schooler and middle schoolers start late. I understand that it's a smaller area. They're not traveling quite the distance that Chugiak, Eagle River, Anchorage is traveling, but they do have severe weather like we do in the wintertime. So have you looked to them for pros and cons of what they went through when they switched from the traditional start time to this other start time?
I think I did one telephone interview. They did do a change that was fundamentally research compliant. I'm going to admit there's been so much water under the bridge since then. I can't remember exactly what the gist of the conversation was, but I think they were satisfied with what they did. They had some challenges with elementary age children given going early, and I seem to recall there were some wildlife concerns in Juneau with bear and moose, with kids being out in dark, and I remember that being part of the conversation, but I remember they were fundamentally satisfied with what they did, and they, I think they added some other supports to make sure kids were safe.
I think you would find more buy-in from Alaskans if you provided some Alaskan-based research on other districts that might have changed their start times.
Yeah, I think if there were one petition I'd like to see this community generate would be a request to someone to fund doctors at the U of A to do a high-quality sleep study of adolescents in Alaska. And I've been trying to see if I can get people interested in it, and I think it would be expensive. The study that I just showed you was pretty pricey. The district paid for part of it. I think National Jewish paid for part of it, and I think one of the big universities paid for part of it. Because there were thousands and thousands of hours of interviews, and a lot of these kids wind up in a sleep study where they're plugged in, and some of them, may have sleep disorders, but I think there may have been some Fitbits involved in some of this, I think, is how they measured how much sleep the children were getting. So I think that was part of it, is that in order to do a sleep study, you have to monitor children. And so I think that that's what makes them expensive. I mean, I've got a professional in the room, Dr. Long. Is that how you do a sleep study?
Yeah, in general, if you want a more objective study of someone's sleep-wake patterns, we do what's called actigraphy, which is exactly like a Fitbit. Those devices can be expensive, so some researchers will use like Apple Watches or Fitbits. The main problem with those, we don't have access to the algorithms that you kind of use that data. And other less expensive options are sleep diaries filled out by parents, which is usually what I use in my practice.
Great. Thank you, sir. Other questions, comments, or we'll just wrap it up and thank everybody for this big piece of your Friday night. I think this is a great conversation. It was great to hear from everybody, and we appreciate your time. Anybody else? Well, thanks, everybody. Good evening, and have a great weekend.